Hey, Motorman here, and this week we're going to talk about trail braking. I get so many questions about it, so I'm going to explain it the best way I can. Trail braking on your Harley Davidson or whatever motorcycle you happen to have. If it's got two wheels, these techniques are going to work. Well, okay, so trail braking, I hear a lot about this. People ask me about it all the time, and you know, here in Florida we don't have many curves. It's not a big deal. It comes in, trail braking comes in especially handy when coming down a winding mountain road, and of course there'll be other times as well. And it is just a skill, another skill that you could put in your bag of tricks. Now it just happens that right down the street from where I live, we happen to have a few S curves. Yeah, they are curves. They're not very severe, but we're going to go over this. And by the way, if you don't know what trail braking is, it's a technique used when coming around a winding road or going into a curve where you keep the front brake on a little bit, and that pushes the front end down and gives you more traction. Now the way you've probably heard about it and the way I've talked about coming around a curve, right here we're going into this curve, I press forward on the right grip, the bike leans, and I come around the curve rolling slightly on the throttle. That's what I'm doing right here. I've done that for years, and really here in Florida I never felt the need to go as fast as possible around a curve. Especially, I'm on my Road King right now, but I've got you know, a cruiser type motorcycles. Hopefully you didn't buy a cruiser type motorcycle to tear around the curves with, because if you did, you got the wrong bike. You can do it, but if you really want to tear up the twisties, you should probably get a sport bike or a sport tourer. So we're going to go through this same set of curves quite a few times, and I'm going to explain trail braking to you. Remember that the point of trail braking is to get more traction out of that front tire. So I'm going to come around this curve. I'm going to keep a little pressure on the front brake. That's going to dip my front end down. It's going to shorten the wheelbase ever so slightly, and it'll give me more traction. Now if I was really going 70 or 80 around that curve, which the bike will do, that would really help me. Under normal conditions, yeah, you really don't need it. So coming around another curve, I want to put a little front brake on, and I can actually feel that front end dipping down slightly. I'm going to start releasing that front brake when I get to the apex. If you're not familiar, the apex is the part of the turn where you're no longer going into the curve, but you're coming out of it. That's where you could release the brake. Now I remember one of the first times I tried trail braking, I was coming down a very steep winding mountain road up in Tennessee, and somewhere in the area of the Dragon. I don't remember which street it was on or what road, but I found out that engine braking wasn't enough to slow me down enough to get through the curve safely. And I started using that front brake. That slowed me down, and it put a lot of traction on that front tire. It came in especially handy under normal conditions. Some people may argue with me about this. In fact, I'm sure somebody will. You really don't need trail braking. It's when you're coming around these curves kind of hot. So I'm going to go back up this same set of curves, and I'm going to try to demonstrate that for you again. I realize that it's not an easy thing for you to see, so it's best that I explain it as I go through the curves. And once again, I'll be putting a little pressure on that front brake. In fact, as I approach the curve, I'm going to use both brakes. I will release the rear brake, keep a little front brake on, plant that front tire as I come around the curve. Here we go. I'm doing my braking. I'm going to release, downshift, stay with a little front brake. Still with a little front brake because it's an S curve. Another one here. That front tire is planted solidly in the ground. The faster you go, the more that you want to use that technique. Another helpful thing about it, that we'll go through this curve here, starting from the outside, little front brake, little front brake, release it as I get through the curve. Again, the faster you go, if you want to get in that turn really hot and get out of it really quickly with as much traction as possible, you want to use that front brake, not the rear brake. Still want to push forward on one of the grips. If the road is going to the left, I'm going to push forward on the left grip. That makes the bike lean left and go left. If the road is curving to the right, I want to push forward on this right grip. And by the way, I've got my half gloves, and I've told you why I use that, because I have to press the buttons on the camera, and it makes it a lot easier if I got my fingers sticking out. If I want to coming around a right curve, I press forward on the right grip. The bike leans right and goes right. I did an entire video on counter steering. You should watch that. It's got about 500,000 hits. And as I say, under normal conditions, or if you're not familiar with the trail braking technique, just stick to doing your braking before the curve, looking through the curve, and roll on the throttle slightly as you come around the curve. You may be asking, how much pressure do you need on the front brake? Well, it's actually very little. And I know that it's hard to say what very little pressure is, but here's a way of testing it. Right now my motorcycle is in neutral. I'm going to push forward. The bike is moving. I'm going to press on the front brake till I feel slight drag. I can feel it now. It's hard to push forward, but it's not clamping down on the front tire. That's about how much pressure you need. You can do the same thing going backwards. You can do this in your driveway or your garage. As a matter of fact, it's easier to push it backwards. So I'm pushing backwards, no brake at all. I put a little pressure on that front brake. I feel it starting to drag now. It's just a slight movement of the brake. Depends on how much play you have in your brake lever, but that's really all you need. You do not want to grab it. You don't want to snatch that brake, because if you do that, that tire could tuck under and you're going to go down. So you got to use light pressure. Be gentle with that front brake. It's got a lot of power. In fact, it's 80 to 90% of your stopping force. We're going to go through that same set of curves again. Mainly because they're very convenient to have them right down the street from my house, and there are not too many places here in Florida where you have curves. So I'm going to pick up my speed here. I'm hitting 50 miles an hour. I'm going to use both front and rear brakes. I'm going to release the rear brake and trail brake into this curve. Trail brake it into the curve. Light pressure. Released it now. I apply it. Release it. So it's about halfway through the curve. By the way, when you're going through the curves like this, you're basically doing is straightening out the curve as much as possible. So coming into this turn here, I'm going to do my braking. I'm going to release the rear brake. I'm going to roll on the throttle with a little brake pressure on the front. release it, apply it. And the best way to practice this, as usual, is go to a big empty parking lot. Get your speed up 20 miles an hour or so, and start using a little bit of front brake as you're making turns, big wide turns. Now, of course, if you're making sharp low speed turns, you do not want to use this front brake. You want to use the rear brake. That's going to help to steady the motorcycle. The better you get with the clutch and throttle at low speeds, you can pretty much, when you're practicing, eliminate the use of the rear brake. And for those of you with motorcycles with link brake, which this bike has, it doesn't mean anything. Either in trail braking or using the rear brake for low speed maneuvers, it's not going to help or hurt you. So let's get that out of the way. I know a lot of bikes have link brakes, including this one. It's not a mystery. It's not going to put you down on the ground unless you're a real doofus and you tend to jam on those brakes in the middle of a curve. So I hope you get the idea. And should you try this? Well, sure, you should, like I said, always get another set of tricks or techniques to put in your bag of tricks. And you want to get as much skill as possible on your motorcycle. But this will come in especially handy if you live in a place where you got winding mountain roads, and especially when coming down steep winding mountain road. But to practice it a little bit at a time, do that in a big empty parking lot or even on a deserted road. Start at about 20 miles per hour or so. Now, that's it for now. Till next time. Don't forget to subscribe, and I hope you give me a thumbs up. And I try to make it as simple as possible. Till next time.